Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Missa Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. Before we get into the show today, I want to take a moment for a special message. Right now, I think the thoughts and prayers of the entire country are with the individuals affected by Hurricane Harvey. One of our sister schools, the Houston Sudbury School, was directly in the storm's path. Earlier in the week, I reached out to the Houston Sudbury School and asked how we at the podcast could help. Here's their reply. We would deeply appreciate any help your listeners can give. Any donations will go to the school for repairs or to help the affected families. Anyone interested in helping can send donations via PayPal at houstonsudbury@gmail.com, or they can contact us at info@houstonsudburyschool.com or through our Facebook page. Houston needs help all over. The need is overwhelming and expansive. Anyone interested in helping in a more general way can give to United Way Houston at unitedwayhouston.org. This will be a long recovery for our city and for everyone. I made a donation to the Houston Sudbury School this morning, and I hope you'll consider doing the same. We're all in this together. Now on to the show. Today we're talking about creativity and how the drive to make things is nurtured at Alpine Valley School. On this show, I've interviewed graduates who left school and went on to be college graduates, IT professionals, managers, supervisors, and customer service representatives. But so far, I've not yet spoken to someone who makes their living in the arts, which is interesting because a great many AVS students and graduates are very creative, and many have gone on to earn their living making art in some way. The fact that AVS and schools like us produce so many creative individuals is, in my mind, not an accident. Given enough freedom, space, and time, many individuals connect with their creative flow as students here. A quote from D. Hawk, I think, best describes what AVS students experience. Make space in your mind, and creativity will instantly fill it. To put it mildly, AVS students have an abundance of space. Back when I was a student, my creative pursuit was writing. I have always loved to write, and have done so in some form or another since I was old enough to hold a pencil. Storytelling is a passion of mine, and one that I found significantly stifled before coming to Alpine Valley School. Even while enrolled in creative writing classes in public school, I still had to write what the teacher told me to write, and was often discouraged by people whose job it was, at least in theory, to support my interest. In 6th grade, I had a writing teacher who I greatly admired tell me, with all the gravity she could muster, that I needed to have a backup plan, because my writing was not strong enough to support a future career. I didn't write so much as a short story for nearly 3 years after that. Not until I came to AVS, that is, where I found a group of friends who were also interested in creative writing, and the infamous AVS Creative Writing Group of the early 2000s was formed. In that group, I found a way to share my writing, receive useful feedback, and be as silly as I wanted to without being stifled. It was such a gift, and one I've treasured my entire life. Many Alpine Valley School students have used their time to pursue artistic talents, whether it be painting, costuming, acting, dancing, or, as I mentioned, creative writing. At one point, we even had a student who published a monthly newsletter featuring students' writing and artwork called The Muse, not to mention the countless student-produced talent shows, plays, and magic performances. And for the more solitary students, there have always been spots at school where one can seek peace and spend an afternoon alone, quietly drawing with no pressure to find something more productive to do. My guest today is Lisa Mancuso, an AVS graduate who has spent her adult life immersed in artistic creation. She talks firsthand about the experience of finding space to create at Alpine Valley School and shares how her pursuits have changed over time. Here's our conversation. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, Missa. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Would you start by introducing yourself and telling our listeners a little bit about your history with Alpine Valley School?
Sure. My name is Lisa Mancuso. I've been with Alpine Valley School since I was about 5. My family was one of the starting families with the school, and my sister is Gina. My mother was, or still is, a staff member, and she was sort of around since the beginning. So
That's great. So you said you were 5 when you first came to AVS?
yes.
Yeah, that's great. And you went the whole time, right? You graduated from AVS and the whole thing.
Yes, I did. I went the whole time, like you said.
Yeah. So what's your earliest memory of life at school?
I remember the playground, which was very important. The little forest, which I think was about 10 whole trees, which is my favorite place on campus. And I remember playing with Hannah, and we were playing pretend in the parking lot, and we had to hold our breaths while we were running across the asphalt. And I only got about 5 feet before I stopped, and I called ahead because she had gotten much farther than I had, and said, "Hannah, I can't go that far. I need to breathe." And she said, "Oh, don't worry. Just breathe through your nose." And of course, being a little kid, I thought that made perfect sense. So we both made it across the parking lot.
So what sorts of things do you remember doing at school while you were a student?
I did a lot of drawing. I remember having conversations at the main room table. That was always fun. And the couches were a good spot to sit and have conversations. Tag was very important. Played Pokemon on our Game Boys for a while. And all sorts of things. Anything that caught our fancy, and we got to do it. Playing pretend was really a big part of that too. I remember Ree and I and Zoe used to play Powerpuff Girls, and I was always Bubbles.
That's my favorite Powerpuff Girl. That's the best one to be,
She
I think.
is the best one. She has the cutest hair, for sure.
Yes, for sure. So you did a lot of, you said drawing and playing and things like that. How does that compare with the sort of things that you do now as an adult?
Well, I got my degree in drawing, so that's pretty similar.
So pretty close.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we did some costuming while we were there too. We did a convention or two while I was at school, and that's sort of what I plan on pursuing. So that's the next step for me, is I'm going to start really working towards costuming, and I'm going to start a blog and all of the self-marketing stuff that you need to do to be a freelancer. So that's the next.
And so you would be sewing the costumes?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, one finished, and I could send you it, and if you want to put that up on the website with this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great.
Great, I'll do that.
Cool. So you got your degree in drawing.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I started going to Red Rocks Community College while I was still at AVS. I think it was the last year when I was starting the thesis process, and I also wanted to start taking classes. So I did 2 semesters the final year that I was at AVS. And I think I did math and Tai Chi or something like that because I needed a physical something for my degree. And then I started doing drawing classes, and I loved them. They were so much fun. And it was really an interesting transition because it was so much easier to go into college because I only had to be responsible for myself. I didn't have to worry about my relationship with anyone except for like the teachers. And it was really easy. I always heard that college was like this big scary thing. It was just fun.
Well, that's nice to hear, because that's one of the questions is, how do kids in an unstructured environment like AVS make that transition to college, which is, more structured in certain ways. And it sounds like that was pretty easy for you.
Right? It was. I think a lot of that was because I felt confident in what I was choosing to do. I knew that I was capable, so anything that they threw at me, I could handle. And if I had questions, I was comfortable asking about what I needed to know because that's what I had grown up doing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I also think, did it seem to you like it helped because you didn't necessarily see adults as authority figures? Like you weren't afraid to approach your teacher because you've had so much experience?
Yeah, and I think that does have to do with the confidence that ABS gives to you. So instead of being like an us and them type of thing, you're all in it together. It doesn't matter what your age is. It's just you are a person and they are a person. So you interact with them the same way you would interact with anyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were at school, speaking of interacting with people, how was your experience with judicial committee as a student?
Well, it was such a part of everyday life that I don't think I really thought about it until after school. But I think that's a big part of why ABS works so well. It's like the great equalizer. Everyone is responsible for themselves, and JC is the committee that enforces that rule. So you feel confident in telling someone, I don't like what you're doing. And if they don't stop, you can take that complaint and have it be looked at in a very critical way by the Judicial Committee. And you can go there and plead your case and be taken seriously, no matter who you're having a problem with. So I think that's a really important part of ABS.
Yeah, I agree. And no matter what your complaint is too, I don't on one of the episodes that's we haven't published yet, but's coming up, we have a story about a student who was a JC clerk and he never wrote anybody up, hardly ever, but he still had to deal with other people's complaints with each other. And he said it gave him a lot of empathy because there are cases that seemed like they might have been petty to him, and he certainly would have written them up, but to other people, they were a really big deal. So I think that's, the seriousness of it is there regardless of who's in charge.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you remember getting written up? I mean, you were at school a long time, so I assume that you must have gotten written up at least once.
Oh, yes, I was. I did pretty well. I think most of the complaints against me were mess cases.
Yeah. And how was
But
that when you were little to go and face judgment for your mess?
oh, it was awful. It was so scary. But like you did something wrong, and I usually try not to do that. But it also sort of made it okay in a way because you did something wrong and then you go face the consequences and then you're done. And no one will hold it against you. It's just a part of being at ABS. So learning to handle doing something wrong is also a part of what the Judicial Committee is about. So being written up isn't great, but it definitely has a good lesson attached to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Did it get easier as you got older? Like it was
Yes,
less
it did.
scary? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you take on any sort of positions or roles in the school while you were a student?
Yes, I did. I was JC clerk for 2 terms, I think. I ran with Kennedy and then with Ari the second term. Maybe it was 3. Jeez. And that was a little tough. It's just emotions can run high in that sort of situation, and so it's sort of balancing that with getting the meeting done efficiently. It was hard. It's really hard. But it was a good lesson, and I decided I never wanted to do something like that ever again.
That's good. Sometimes that can be the most valuable lesson. Is I
Yes,
don't like that.
absolutely. And then I was chore checker for a little while. And I guess I was a tough one because people didn't like that I made them actually clean things.
Yes, I don't know if you know this, but you have gone down in history as the most exacting chore checker, which is not a bad thing because We a little bit. I think because mostly when we bring on new chore checkers, you're like the standard. We're like, listen, Lisa knew what was up. She could find the one piece of dirt on the floor that you did not vacuum up,
and I would point it out to
and
you.
we need you to do that. Yeah, because the school was exceptionally clean.
Well, I'm glad I went down in history for something good then.
Yeah. So what was that experience like for you as a chore checker? I know you said it was not. People weren't always very happy with you, but
No.
did you learn to deal with that sort of conflict that came up?
Yeah, I've always been pretty okay with conflict. So it was mostly just not making a big deal about it, just saying you missed a spot, and then it's hard hearing that sort of thing. So I need to be sort of a little sympathetic towards these people who spent time trying to clean something and then having someone say, no, do it again. That's rough. So I try not to be hard on them, but still keep my standards up because the school did need to get clean. That was the whole point of doing a chore. So if you only half do it, then what's the point, really?
Right. So firm but kind.
Right. That's a balance.
Well, that'll serve you well if you ever have kids. So tell me about your experience graduating from AVS with that whole process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the way it's presented may be a little bit different from what I got out of it, since the process is you write a thesis and you present your thesis to your panel and they judge whether or not you're ready to move on. But what I got out of it was more, this is a time where you reflect on what you've done at AVS. And since it is sort of a different way of learning, it's so organic that you don't necessarily notice that you're learning things. It can be difficult to pinpoint where you learned this or that. But if you really stop and look back and say, this is where I started, this is where I'm going, and how did I get to this point where I am now, that's a really valuable thing to do. So that's sort of how I approached that process. And then your panel, instead of being judges, they're there to really help you and say, maybe you could elaborate on this thing that you touched on here. That's interesting. Or could you explain more in depth this other thing that you sort of mentioned, but we think is really valuable? And if you explore that, you might learn something new.
That's great. That is such a good way to put it. I think that's kind of, what we want students to get out of it is that reflection and that, did you make the best use of your time while you were here? And I'm glad that was the experience for you. And did you find that reflection to be satisfactory? Did you feel like you'd spent your time well?
Yes, I did. And I was a little worried at first because graduating after being there like most of my life, it's a little scary. But what I found when I was going through everything was that I really did spend my time wisely. I learned a lot, and I learned way more than I thought I had. And I knew at the end of it that I was ready to move on to the next thing, and that I was prepared for that. And I had this community that had really helped me and would continue to help me as I moved forward into something that I wasn't really sure what it was going to be, but I would be okay because I knew myself and I knew what I wanted.
That's wonderful. I think that's all we could possibly ask. So you said that after you graduated, you were already going to classes while you were a student at Red Rocks. What did you do after you graduated?
I got a job at a little dry cleaners, and I went to school part-time until I got my degree. That took a while. And then, let's see, I went off to Hawaii. I decided I wanted to get my bachelor's degree in business. And since it's not necessarily the most fun topic, I decided maybe I'll go to Hawaii and it'll be this fun new experience for me while I'm doing this other thing that I feel like I need to do, but isn't necessarily fun. So I sort of balance that. And I realized as soon as I got there that I had made a mistake, that I didn't enjoy being so isolated. And being able to really look at myself and say, this isn't working, you need to change this, was very important. Because sometimes you really just build things up and think that you have to commit to this, and it's not working. So being able to really look yourself in the eyes and say, you need to change this, was something I think I learned from being at school and the whole thesis process, and saying to myself, you did something important and you know what you want and you need to go and get what you want. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what, Lisa, for most of us, I think that usually takes much of our lives, to be able to say, well, this is not working for me. I need to not do that.
Right.
So good for you that you figured it out so quickly and you were able to make that change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a hard one. But it's so much better to do it quickly because you get so invested in things. I think I made it through half of the semester. And then that was it. I'm making myself miserable. I need to be doing something productive with my time. It's you only have so much to work with. And if you're just miserable, you need to change something.
For sure. So what have you been doing lately?
Well, I've decided that I want to do costuming as a career. And I've been looking into different ways of doing that. And a lot of what I've looked at is self-marketing and then marketing yourself online, creating a brand. Since this is pretty much freelance work, I will be conducting myself as a freelancer, which is a lot of work. It's so much work.
No doubt.
But I also want to continue learning things about sewing because that's going to be what I'm making as a sewer. And I don't really enjoy the design and pattern making so much. But that's something I'm going to have to learn to do anyway. So that's on the list of things I need to learn more about.
Yeah. Does your company have a name yet?
Oh, no. This isn't the planning stage.
Well, you have to let us know when you do so that we can provide marketing for you here on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a free outlet.
Yeah, I've been looking at internships. I have an internship with a bridal shop, and I wanted to move on to maybe the Buell Theater, if they have one available. Maybe I can talk my way into that and then learn from them at the same time as I make my own costumes and start creating a presence online and a following and all of the things that you need to do to be a freelancer. So.
Yeah, well, that's great. Good for you, because I think, those things obviously go together. If you're working making costumes, and then you can translate that knowledge directly into your own business.
Absolutely.
Too. Cool. So when you look back on being a student at AVS, or when you try to, when you talk about that experience to anybody else, what are the things that you think about?
I think mostly it's having all that time to really explore what I want to do. So I got to dabble in whatever I wanted because I had that time. So I did whatever I felt like. So that was writing and sewing and drawing. And I found things that I was really passionate about. And I got to take that and apply it to what I want to do with the rest of my life. So I think that's really what I think about when I think about AVS. And also the relationships that I made with people. It was so important I have friends that I still talk to regularly, and they're my support group. And having all that time to really get to know people, like when you're in a classroom environment, most of it is you're learning. Even if you have people that you talk to every once in a while, it's focused on something else. But at AVS, it's really, you have time to create really personal relationships with people. And knowing how to do that is so important. And knowing what you want out of a relationship is also something that AVS really does very well, because you have that time to explore what you want. It isn't just what I want to do with the rest of my life, it's how I want other people to treat me.
Wow, that's great. I love hearing that. So if you had to pick one thing that was the most important kind of life skill or lesson that you learned while you were at school, what do you think that would be?
Communication. AVS does a really good job at that, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. And the only way to learn how to do that is to communicate constantly with a bunch of very opinionated people. And AVS has those. I know, because I'm one of them. Yeah, it's so important to be able to really express yourself, because even if you have all of these important thoughts and feelings, if you can't communicate that, then it's so frustrating, first of all, and then you can't really get much done.
Yeah.
And it's also,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's good to be understood, and that's a big part of it. And once you have those skills, you can do anything. If you don't know something, you go and ask someone. And then all these doors open for you. You can learn whatever you want. You can talk to whoever you want. You feel confident because you know how to talk to people and you know how to express yourself. So definitely AVS does that really well.
That's wonderful. And so my last question and my favorite question is about whether you have a favorite memory of AVS.
Favorite memory?
I know it's a hard question to pick one. I understand. I do.
Let's see. I think I'm going to go with playing tag. And playing tag isn't just the tag part, it's also the talking about it afterward part. It's like half of it's tag and the rest of it is like recap. It's like watching a football game. I remember a bunch of different people would come and like everyone would go outside and we'd all run around. It didn't matter if you were like little and you couldn't run very fast, or you were one of the big kids and could get everyone, or Andreas, when Andreas was playing tag, just like, forget it, he's going to win. And when Bruce would come out and play with us, because he was the fastest, I think he and Andreas did a race. And I think Andreas actually won that race.
Wow.
Yeah, we were very impressed. So I think tag was a big equalizer, because we all go out and play and just have fun all together.
Mm-hmm. Yep, those were good times for sure.
Definitely.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us all about your experience.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, good. And when you have your business all settled, you make sure to send me the information and I'll drop it in on here.
I absolutely will. And I'll send you that picture of the dress.
Please do. And I'll make sure I put a link to it in the show notes.
Okay. Sounds great.
All right. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
I just want to take a minute to honor Lisa's vulnerability in sharing her story about her struggles in Hawaii. So often we only want to tell the tales of our wild successes and not the times when things didn't go as we wanted them to, and I applaud her for being so open about her struggle. Many former AVS students have told me that one of the lessons they learned at school, which they value highly, was learning what they did not want to do, not just the things that they did. As you've heard, one of the experiences Lisa found the most beneficial at school was dabbling, having time to explore different interests, pursue the ones she found interesting, and abandon the ones she did not. Many people discovering AVS for the first time are concerned that students will not be exposed to many different activities or ideas in such a small environment, and without an adult guiding their learning. However, I've found that with the spread of the internet, there is no shortage of exposure to new ideas for young people, not to mention the constant hub of conversation at school all day. There are always individuals pursuing their own interests at school, as I did with creative writing, and that enthusiasm often spreads to others who end up getting involved as well. The important aspect, to my mind, is that students are choosing to participate in the activity because they want to, not because someone has said it will be, quote, good for them, and they are free to quit whenever they want to, which is also a powerful tool for young people in developing agency. People ask all the time about what a typical day at AVS looks like. And in our effort to answer that question, we've created an Instagram account. You can find us at Alpine Valley School on Instagram. That's the @ Alpine Valley School. During the school year, we post pictures of life at school regularly. If you are one of the people who wants more insight into what our school really looks like day to day, I highly recommend following our account. And if you don't have an Instagram account, all of the pictures are posted on the About Us page on alpinevalleyschool.com. So you can always look at them there. The next podcast will be the 10th episode of the show, which is a pretty big milestone, and I've got something new and different in the works to share with you. If you haven't already, I highly recommend subscribing to the podcast on iTunes or whatever app you use to get your podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. Because believe me, you will not want to miss episode 10. It's going to be pretty special. And as always, if you have any feedback on the show or questions you want me to address, please send an email to podcast@alpinevalleyschool.com. As I mentioned earlier in the show, please consider making a contribution to help our sister school, the Houston Sudbury School, as they recover from the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. I'll put a link with information on how you can help in the show notes for this episode. Thanks so much to my guest, Lisa Mancuso, for coming on the show, and thanks to all of you for listening. Remember to tune in 2 weeks from now for our very special 10th episode. I'm Missa Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again soon with more stories of real learning for real life.